Okay, thank you, everyone. We'll begin again. Now we have the pleasure of having Reverend Melissa Opel speak about her experience through the Evangelical Christian movement. And for those of you who don't know, she just came day before yesterday to San Francisco to be the resident minister of the San Francisco Buddhist Temple, which is like the flagship for all BC8, because that's where all of us Japanese Americans BC8 ministers are registered through Honganji, through the San Francisco Buddhist Temple. Right? Her and her wife, Becca, will hopefully come to these CBE events more often since they're so close.
Please join me, Gasha. When ignorant and wise, even grave offenders and slanderers of the Dharma, all alike turn about and enter Shinjin, they are like waters that, on entering the ocean, become one in taste with it. Namo Mirabutsu. Namo Mirabutsu. Namo Mirabutsu. Namo. So I'm going to be a little more, this is going to be very personal experience heavy and less doctrinally heavy. So just as a heads up. Also, I'm usually very buttoned up and I have like everything written out, and because I get ADHD, well, I am ADHD, and so we're going to ramble together a little bit. But I don't think there's any really authentic way to talk about my experience other than to kind of let it come out. And so, because it was a very interesting experience. So I was raised Catholic, like Carmela as well. So did 18 years in the Catholic Church. And when I was a senior in high school, I actually had a really wonderful priest. He was an Irish priest. He had a great accent, which I loved so much. Probably part of why I love David so much. And you know, he was my childhood priest through everything, right? And he, for the first time in my childhood, got to go home and visit his sister in Ireland. He went on a sabbatical. And while he was gone, the religious education director kind of had a coup against him. So, you know, when you think Catholic priest and where we're at in today's society, you think, oh, it was bad. No, he had a temper. He had an Irish temper. And this guy was supposed to be his friend. They went sailing together, had him over for dinner all the time. From, you know, being a child or a teenager, you know, I saw them as buddies. And for this to kind of come out that he kind of had this coup against our priest, who was immediately transferred out of the diocese. And so it's my first time kind of stepping back and kind of questioning, like, I don't understand how that happens. I don't understand how you can say you love someone to their face and then betray them in that way. So I was really hurt by that. And so when that happened, I was getting ready to leave for college, and I was like, you know, Catholicism's kind of sexist. I can't be a priest. I can't, you know, there's so many things I can't do. I'd have to be a nun and wear a dress and, you know, all these things. And if you can't tell, dresses aren't my thing. And so it was just like, I was just really hurt. And so I just kind of decided to go to college and not do anything with religion. I just wanted a break. So I got to Cheney, Washington. It's a small town in Eastern Washington for Eastern Washington University. I was there on a partial music scholarship. And, you know, it was the first time I was kind of all alone and didn't have any friends. I didn't know anybody there. So I was really kind of sad. I was scared. It was, you know, different experience. And there was a group that was inviting people to come to Bible study. The name of the group was InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. So, okay, fine. Maybe I'll try it out. There were some people on my floor that were Bible study leaders there. And this is something that InterVarsity does. When you get into the organization, they ask you to be a Bible study leader, and they ask you to be radical for Christ. And so things like that are, you're a Bible study leader, you stay in the dorm, and you evangelize all the time. Your job is to try and get people to come to Bible study and come to Jesus. So, even if you don't really want to be a part of it, I just happened to be on a floor where there were 2 Bible study leaders. And then my friends started going, the people that I was in music classes with. I was on the arts and lit floor. And so it just kind of felt like the natural thing to do. I'll just hang out with the people that I'm starting to make friends with. I went to their first worship service that they had. There's guitars and tambourines and raucous music. Coming from a Catholic background, I immediately had a panic attack. People were raising their hands in the air. Not anything that you do in the Catholic Church. And so I was super uncomfortable. But I just kept getting prodded to come back. And so I kept coming back. And, it felt familiar, right? Like that church stuff felt familiar. And so before I knew it, I found that I was part of the group. I was going to Bible study and I was going to worship service. I was getting used to all this kind of different sort of style. And I liked the things of you don't have to wear dress pants to church. You can wear jeans. Come as you are. Just be who you are. I'd find out later that wasn't really true. You weren't really allowed to come as you are. And I'll get into that in a minute. And so as the years kind of went on at my time in InterVarsity, I ended up becoming a Bible study leader myself. I ended up becoming a worship leader, so I was the one leading people to raise their hands. I was never much of a hand raiser. It still, to this day, makes me uncomfortable deeply inside. But if that's how people want to express themselves, that's cool. Go for it. And so about my junior year, conversations started to get had about me coming on full-time staff with InterVarsity. And all my friends said, oh, you're going on to staff with InterVarsity. And, this just kind of kept propelling this storyline. So my senior year, we were at a retreat because InterVarsity liked to do retreats. And there's 2 really memorable experiences that happened during that time. One was they had a higher regional director from InterVarsity came to speak. And he told this story of these female Bible study leaders that on a leaders retreat, he found them in the bushes making out. And they were immediately expelled from the group. And they were asked to never come back. And even though I hadn't come out at that point in time, something in my stomach sank. And something felt really amiss about that. But like any good American, you just stuff it down. Just don't think about it, stuff it down. The second part that happened was I was invited to be part of the worship team for that retreat. And it's a weird dynamic, the people that are paid to be staff members at InterVarsity and students. There's a weird kind of power dynamic. They're former students, so they're not that far removed from you in age, usually. But there's, its own kind of authority and hierarchy to it. And they were intimidating at times as well, because they were so radical for Christ that, you really just had to feel like you were all in with them to kind of fit in as well. And I really retreated from that, and so I didn't talk much. I kind of shut down. And what I found out later was that this was kind of a job interview for me for InterVarsity. So some interesting things had started to happen my senior year. I had been taking some religion classes. I had been working on a minor in religion. I had a professor, Dr. Kenny, who found me in the courtyard one day to sit down and eat lunch. And he told me, Melissa, I used to be like you. And this path doesn't end well. I think you need to rethink what you're doing. So that was one kind of red flag that popped up. I really respected him. And I started kind of questioning what I was doing. I felt uncomfortable pushing people to come to Christ. It was nothing that I was ever comfortable with. Every time I had to do it, I would feel sick to my stomach. I felt like I had a reputation on campus as like this evangelical Bible study leader, and I didn't like it. I didn't really care a lot for who I was, but I didn't know how not to. My entire friend group was wrapped up in this group. In hindsight, there's times where, depending on what day you're getting me on, I do feel like InterVarsity has a lot of cultish tendencies to it, but it's very dependent on who the campus leader is and kind of the flavor that they're putting into the group. I'm sure there's some healthy organizations out there. Mine was not one of them. Some other things that happened, I started asking questions about the Bible. I started asking questions about the doctrine. Things were not lining up for me. They weren't feeling right. And another Bible study leader, an older student, said to me, "Don't ask questions. It will get you nowhere good." So now I've had two people tell me I'm going nowhere good on complete opposite sides of the spectrum. And it was a lot to process. The next big thing that happened my senior year, there was a gay couple on campus, which this was like 2000, 2001, was not super common. And they had asked me into a relationship with them. Spicy. And I freaked out. I was like, "I'm not gay." And they were like, so I talked to you have somebody called you have discipleship. You have somebody who's like your senior that you go to for things. And so I brought this up with her, and she said, "Well, actually we've had some questions about your sexuality." And I was like, "Oh, great. Is anybody going to talk to me about this?" So it was really uncomfortable. Another moment that happened was one of my really good friends came out. Well, I shouldn't say he came out because he didn't. Him and another Bible study leader were secretly sleeping together. And the one other Bible study leader had a girlfriend. The organization swept it under the carpet. And I actually found out through a friend of a friend, the friend of the girlfriend. And she asked me, "Why does the one guy, he can't be a Bible study leader anymore, and the other guy can?" And we started talking about it and found out that InterVarsity had required them to go to counseling. I think now we would call that gay conversion. So the person who was allowed to stay a Bible study leader chose to do so. The one who did not chose to be his authentic self and left the group. And then I got to watch him get ostracized from everybody, including myself, because it's what you do. It's how you stay in the group. And so as all of this is happening, still in the background is you're going to be a Bible study leader, a full-time leader with InterVarsity. So the decision time comes out, people have been asked, and then the person I was doing discipleship with pulled me aside and said, "We're actually not asking you onto staff with InterVarsity." Part of me was crushed, and part of me was relieved, because these questions have still been coming up, and so many red flags had come up in my senior year. But I had also sacrificed a lot to be a part of the group, including my education. And so I didn't know what I was going to do after graduation. And then in a moment of kind of pain, I went back to that person and I said, "I need you to really explain to me why." Because the answer I was given was, "We're not taking white women onto staff any longer. We want a more multicultural group, and we want more men to be staff leaders." Up until that point, however, InterVarsity had been counting me as a minority because I'm part Native American. And so I went back and said, "Please explain to me how in your census, I am not a white woman, but in this decision, I'm a white woman. It's very confusing. And I have to grapple with my own, issues with my heritage and different experiences. And this was just kind of one of like, I just don't understand. Please explain to me. And then she said, well, actually, the conversation was, you're fat, you're overweight, and it's not biblical. And furthermore, we think you're gay. And so in that moment, it was like, oh, I was good enough to do your bidding for 4 years. And now you have wounded me deeply. But I still didn't know what to do. I didn't have the courage to just leave Christianity. And I thought, maybe the problem is the place. Maybe it's InterVarsity. InterVarsity is unhealthy. Maybe it's not Christianity. So maybe Catholicism is unhealthy. InterVarsity is unhealthy. So maybe I just haven't found the healthy place. And I had been on the weekends occasionally going to a Foursquare church. And so I decided I'm going to just go to my Foursquare church. They seem healthy. They were not healthy. So as I'm involved in this Foursquare church, I was invited onto their worship team. I play guitar, I play hand drums. I don't play either of them well, but well enough to serve on a worship team, I think. Not like Hillsong or some of these other scandalous, lovely music places, but well enough that I can carry a tune and keep a beat going. And so, again, here I was of service. So again, I'm just grappling with these questions about Christianity. And I don't know what to do with them, but I'm not really courageous enough at this point to actually dig into it. So I kind of just keep going my way. And two things happen. The church that I'm at decides to have a church plant. So a church plant is where one church gets big enough that they're kind of busting at the seams and they want people to go away. But they still want their money and they still want them to be affiliated with them. So they give some seed money to a pastor to start their own church that's an affiliate of their church. So we have a mega church in Spokane that's called Life Center. Life Center had a daughter church called Summit Ridge. That was the church that I was at, and that's how they refer to it. The church is a daughter because you're birthing this thing to go out. It's kind of grotesque. And so then Summit Ridge got too big. They had it was time to have another child, so they had Epic Life. So the worship pastor asks me to go with him. I say yes. Some couple friends that I'd had from college that were there, they went with as well. And we start this new church. In the process of all of that, in those kind of time, I meet my wife, Becca. And so we met at our job, Daybreak. It was a drug and alcohol treatment center for teens. I was working there because my dad was a drug addict and alcoholic, and I wanted to help other kids deal with that. She trained me, as she loves to tell people. But there was something about her that, we just hit it off in a way that I'd never had with anybody I'd ever met before. We were friends for about a year, and then we started dating. And we dated secretly because it was not allowed in the Evangelical church. So as these two lines are kind of going together parallel, I'm asked to be the youth pastor for this church, Epic Life. And I feel like, well, I'm supposed to be living authentically for God, right? But I'm lying about who I am. I need to be honest before I take this position. So I tell, her name was Lisa, the pastor's wife, and she's like, we need to have a meeting, the four of us. So Becca and myself went over to Greg and Lisa's house, and we sat around their table outside. He had his Bible, and he was armed and ready to cut us down in every possible way. So he gave me the ultimatum. We could leave the church, leave their life, not be, separate those ties. Or I could move in with them and do therapy. Again, like we would say, gay conversion. And Becca could go away. They wanted nothing to do with her. They blamed everything on her. Apparently this face wasn't enough. I don't know. So Becca and I went to a park afterwards and had a long conversation. We were both raised in extremely religious families. I wasn't allowed to watch Will and Grace, those types of things. I watched the Ellen show until she came out, and then my mom never let us watch it again. Both of us grew up in a household where the F word was thrown around in the way of describing gay people. We knew that our family would not accept who we were. And even with all of those pressures, we decided to throw caution to the wind, and we left. So then that finally gave me the courage to start investigating. We had somebody come to our house with a life ring to tell us that Christ was the saving grace, and all we had to do was grab onto the ring. We had hate mail sent to our house. I would run into people that I had been in church with for 3-4 years that would turn around and walk away. Had people pretend they never knew who I was, that we had never shared meals or worshiped together or planted a church together. And all of these things were the fuel to finally get me to look at what had been going on in my life, to start to investigate that pit in my stomach that I kept feeling over and over again. And so I did. I started reading, I read a bunch of Reza Aslan, some Bart Ehrman, started just, all sorts of biblical people. And I had this really big question. The Bible talks about man and beast walking together, and I love dinosaurs. My mom, for some reason, allowed me to love dinosaurs. I'm surprised to this day. She knew that this was really the undoing of my Christianity. I would never have been allowed to have a triceratops. And so we were with Becca's dad, and I asked him, there's 2 things that happened with Becca's dad, because they're Baptist. And I asked him, I said, I don't understand this timeline that Evangelical America says about how old the earth is. I was allowed to stay in biology class. I knew, what science says. And I said, so I don't understand how dinosaurs were around, but the Bible says man and beast walk together. And he said, well, man and beast is man and dinosaurs. They walk together. Oh, we're done. No, it's absolutely evolutionary, not possible. How do you explain humanity still being here after the extinction? No, it just doesn't work. So on a doctrinal level, that was the last line. That was you're not robbing me of my childhood. Forget this. I still love dinosaurs. The other part was that Thanksgiving, we went to, I think it was Thanksgiving, we went to church with her dad. Her mom was sick. And the pastor knew that Becca and I were gay, knew that we were living together, knew the situation. He didn't say a word to us when we came into the church. So while a worship song was being sung, everybody was invited to come up and take communion as a family. And so we're watching families walk up and do communion together. And her dad looks and says to us, let's go take communion. And knowing how they feel about us being gay, it was this moment of oh, maybe we're making some traction here. Maybe. And as soon as we get up to the little communion plate, the pastor had been singing, and he dropped the microphone, and he walked swiftly over and said, you are living a life of sin. You are not allowed to take communion here. In front of the entire church. And her father said nothing. And so Becca and I walked back to our seats with our heads hanging. My wife began weeping, and nobody said anything. Nobody said a word. A woman behind her offered her a box of Kleenex. How is that the love that the Bible speaks of? It wasn't. And those were the two last straws. We had tried other churches. We had tried to find the right church. Every church we went to wanted to use us. I had a skill set of music, and as soon as it was found out, they wanted me to be on their worship team. Even when I said, I am not healthy to lead, I am spiritually broken, and I don't know if I even want to believe in this anymore, I was still asked to serve. And when I said no, nobody cared. They didn't want to talk to us anymore. We had nothing to give, nothing to offer. And as I dug into the Bible more and more to try and understand, is it people or is it doctrine? And the answer for me was yes. I was in a place that was not healthy because for me, the teachings were not healthy. They did not want me there as I authentically was. And because I didn't want to change who I wasn't worth their time. So for 10 years, I flip-flopped between agnostic and atheism. There was days where I'd think, oh, maybe there is something, bigger than me. And then other days where I'd be like, nope, deuces. There was maybe some stronger words than that. So there was a lot of pain, obviously, as you can imagine. And so for a while, it was fine. It was fine not being anything. It actually felt kind of nice. There was a lot of really painful fights with our parents and our family. Becca was still kind of trying to hold on to her faith because we walked different journeys and hers was different than mine. And we would have long conversations of, is it people or is it doctrine? Is it people or is it doctrine? And I kept coming back to yes for both. And so about 10 years had passed and life started getting complicated. It started getting painful. We started to have a hard time in our marriage. And I didn't really know how to cope with it. I didn't have the skill set. I had always been taught, pray it out. and like, what do you do when you don't believe in that anymore? And so the bottom started to fall out. And I started to get destructive in my behaviors because I was trying to feel some sort of emptiness. I was trying to fix something that wasn't something I could fix. So after a lot of hardships and things that Becca and I went through, we decided for me to do some pretty intensive therapy to try to work through the root of these things. And so I was in a therapy session with my counselor. And she said to me, you really should go to church. You are a spiritual person, and you're missing that in your life. And I think that this is part of what's going on for you. And I said, oh, I'll never step foot in a church again. And she said, oh, I don't mean a Christian church. No. She said, you sound like a Buddhist to me. And I said, I sound like a Buddhist to you. I had an Eastern religions class in college, so this is full disclosure. I slept through it. I kind of knew the Four Noble Truths, but I got some really good nap times in. And so I said, Buddhism, okay, but this is Spokane, Buddhism. And she said, oh, there's actually a really lovely temple on Perry Street. You should go check it out. I've been there a few times. And she said, you don't have to be just Buddhist. She's like, I follow Jainism, Buddhism, and Christianity. And that's my mixed belief praxis. And I was like, mixed beliefs? You can't do that. It is one or the other, lady. She was blowing my mind. And I was like, you're broken. You have problems. I cannot take your advice. And she said, she's like, I'm assigning this to you as homework. And I was like, damn it. You know I'm a perfectionist. You know I'm going to go now. So I talked to Becca about it, and she said, yeah, let's go. I think they're having a food fundraiser. I saw the banner up. Let's just go to the food fundraiser. Oh, yeah, sure, okay. Yeah, that'll be easy. Yeah, we can just kind of check it out loosely. So another friend came with us, because you can't go alone. So there's three of us. We went into the temple's basement, and they were just kind of closing up for the day. And this lady came over and was like, oh, you guys asked us all the questions that you get asked when you come into a new space. And she was just really lovely and told us a little bit about the temple. And she said, we still have the open house going on upstairs. We have a minister's assistant up there. Why don't you head upstairs? You can check out the Naijin. We're like, okay, weird word. And ask them some questions. And I said, oh, sure, yeah, okay. And then she said, I just have a feeling I'm going to see you next Sunday. Pressure. So we go upstairs. We go into the Hondo, and it's a lot to take in. And if anybody for their first time that is here or online, it's intimidating going into a new religious space, especially when you're taught in Christianity that worshiping false idols is a straight ticket to hell. I already had multiple straight tickets to hell, so I figured we'll just go with it. It's fine. Can't make it any worse. So we go in, and Jefferson Workman was there. And he's kind of a tall guy. He's stocky, and he's got this really cool hipster beard, and he had these black thick rimmed glasses, and he's wearing minister's assistant robes, and he has a bow tie on. And my first thought is are you Muslim? Are you Malcolm X? It's kind of that sort of. He was very handsome, but so he kind of told us a little bit about the temple. And then he just asked, do you have any questions? I just have one question. Why Buddhism? Why? And he proceeded to tell me that in his 30s, he went through a really hard time in his life. And as he started telling us his story, he started crying. And I had never seen a grown man cry talking about their religious experience. But not in that, and it's not that I hadn't seen it. I think that I hadn't seen it in this way that was fully authentic. He wasn't trying to sell me something. He was just talking about his life. That's it. He didn't care if I came back the next Sunday or not. He was just answering wholeheartedly. So we came back the next week, and you can read more about my experience in the Crossing Over book. I have an essay there on my first experience at the temple. But as the service was going on, we started chanting. We chanted Jusege, and I started crying. And I didn't know why. But it was something inside had sparked. Something that I hadn't really felt in a really long time just sparked. And I was trying for Becca not to see it. So I'm crying, and I'm trying to be all go. And even now, thinking about that moment, it still makes me emotional. Because I think for me, I can say this now, and it's in the essay, but Amita is always calling. But we don't always have the ears to hear it. And it was like the earplugs had been taken out. And it would take years to understand that connection. So there was something there. We left, we went and had coffee across the street. And Becca said, it seems like you kind of got something out of that. Do you want to go back? And I said, yeah, I really want to go back. I really want to check this out more. And then she said, well, I'll give you 3 times. She knows I'm an anxious person. And she said, how about, and I think I must have said even too, I didn't want to go back by myself. And she said, I'll give you 3 times so you can get comfortable. You can get to know some people. And then you can kind of do your thing, and I'm still going to figure mine out. So we kept going back. We had Hatawan service out at the cemetery. I thought that was so beautiful, remembering people. It was such a beautiful service. in Christianity, we don't ever remember people. We just kind of go, oh, they're in heaven. Like, we'll see them. We're going to party with them later on, which, by the way, is not biblical. Like, if you read the text, that's not what happens. And so it was this thing of like, oh, like, people here actually care about people that were part of the faith, but like, they don't even know them. They don't even know who they are, but they still love and care about them and will take the time to remember them. And that was really special to me. I really enjoyed that. And so pretty soon, 3 times was up. And Becca didn't say a word. When I got ready for Sunday service, she came with me. And I thought, oh, maybe she lost count. And so I didn't say anything. We went, and the next Sunday she came back with me. And she's been on her own journey for a long time with Buddhism and Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. And I'm not going to speak for her and what she has gone through. But I will say she did become the board president. So she served on our board for about 8 years in various positions. She was the treasurer. Were you the secretary too for a little bit? Yeah, secretary, treasurer, and then vice president and board president. And she got involved with some of the leadership stuff with BCA and all that. And so, as we were going along on this path, our minister at the time, for us, having not been super close to the temple, just up and left. And we were like, oh, I wanted to say a stronger word there, but I censored myself. I was like, oh, we're in another unhealthy place. But the temple handled it really well. They had a meeting it was an all members meeting. You didn't even have to be a member. So all of us gathered in the basement, and I said to Becca, I want to see how this goes. I want to see if we're in an unhealthy place. And so the leadership began talking about the situation, what was happening, and it was very transparent. And then when some health issues got brought up about the minister that left, Paul Viel, another minister's assistant, Tokudo minister's assistant, said, just stop the conversation. And he said, we're not here to guess or talk about somebody's health. She's not here to defend herself. This is not an appropriate conversation to have. We need to focus on what we have factually and move forward with that. And I was like, oh, there's an adult in the room. And he's in charge, kind of. Yeah, all right. That was a really good response. So I felt like the temple handled it as best that they possibly could. I didn't feel like anybody was trying to keep any secrets from us. When we asked questions, they were answered. And then I think the other big thing as well was whenever we had questions about Buddhism, we could ask. I was like, you can ask questions here and not get like chastised. And even better, when I asked a question and someone didn't know, they said, I don't know. Let me look it up. Let me reach out to Reverend Castro, who was the supervisor at the time. It wasn't like, oh, I've got all the answers, everything's figured out. It's no, we're on this journey together. This is, you've asked a question that's beyond my limits right now, and I can figure it out, and we'll learn together. And so, we were like, okay, this is gonna be home for a while. And then I told myself that doctrinally, if something didn't feel right, I was gonna leave. Just so stupid. But it was, safety for myself. And so, I would start to have questions about things, and it just seemed like a visiting minister would show up that would talk about it. Mm. And I had kind of hit an impasse with this idea of Amida and Christ. Because us converts, we really want to make Amida a god. We really want to make Amida Christ. So bad. And Jodo Shinshu says, no. And it's really hard when you're indoctrinated into believing in this kind of all-knowing being that is doing all these things for you, that there's language that gets used that stirs up some Christian stuff, And so that stuff would get stirred up. And finally, Reverend Warwick was visiting the temple, and I went to his Q&A after. And somebody had asked the question about all the different Buddhisms, because I was like, maybe Buddhism is okay, but maybe just Jodo Shinshu isn't for me. And maybe I can't come to terms with this Amida thing. And so it was funny, he talked about how, especially as Americans, we like to dig little holes until we find something that we don't like, and then we start digging a new hole. And then we abandon that hole and we go to a new hole. And I was like, oh yeah, that's church shopping. We do that really well in America. Somebody says something you don't like, you leave. You hear something you don't like, you leave. There's so many different choices. Well, Buddhism, Spokane, not that many choices. So he said, there's a point where you need to stay and dig a much deeper hole. And you need to keep digging. And you need to keep digging past your stereotypes and what you think is right. Because what you think is right is probably not right. And it was interesting because I was a head book buyer at the time. And so I had to know a lot, or a little bit about a lot. And so my life, I was just digging little holes and just trying to know as much as I could, but you can't dig into anything. And so I decided, he's right. Everything else about this space has been right for me. So maybe I'm wrong and I need to dig a deeper hole. So I signed up for the correspondence course. And then, we were short minister's assistants. and I'm a helper. I just want to help. And so I was like, can I help? Is there anything I can do to help? And so when I signed up for the correspondence course, that was kind of, she's kind of serious about being here. Why not start the minister's assistant program? She's going to learn, and help the temple. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to learn and I'm going to help the temple. So I started coming to sessions here at the Jodo Shinshu Center. And I got to dig that hole deeper and deeper and deeper. And there was a point where I finally said, I don't have to say if I run into something I don't like that I'm leaving, because I'm going to run into something I don't like. I just need to ask somebody the question. And there's so many people that want to answer that question. And I remember sitting in a class with Dr. Blum, and I think I asked him about the Jesus and Christ thing. And he gave me the best answer that I could ever hear. And he just goes, if you think Amida is Christ, you're wrong. There's nothing else you can be wrong about but this. You're wrong. Get some textbooks and figure it out. I was like, hell yeah. It is what I needed to hear. I just needed somebody to say, stop it. You can make the connection if you want to, but it's not doctrinally correct. And you're wrong. Find the right texts, find the right person. And, he ended up being that right person for a long time to help me with that too. But then as I started to kind of grow in Jodo Shinshu, something else happened. I really felt this incredibly intense connection to Shinran. Because Shinran, I felt like his path and my path were not that different. He stayed in Buddhism the whole time, so good for him. But, he had to go through this really deep religious understanding and awakening for him to find the right space for him to be in. And once he found that right space, he flourished. And not only did he flourish, but he brought other people with him because he helped show that there was a space for them too. There's not much that I'm ashamed of in my life, but my time in Christianity is this kind of thing that I still carry. I worry about the people that I helped flourish in that space. And as a minister in Jodo Shinshu, I don't worry about that. Because there is nothing here that is hurtful. the doctrine and why I brought up the quote that I brought up this morning, this one in taste. Jodo Shinshu is for everybody. I get to be fat gay Melissa. No, nobody's hurting my feelings over that. I carry my own baggage around it, and that's my issue. And it's not to say that we won't run into people in the temple that hurt our feelings. It's going to happen. I think the worst thing that we do to ourselves as converts to Jodo Shinshu is when that happens, we leave. And the reason I say it's the worst thing that we do, that we leave, is because not only do we hurt ourselves, but we actually hurt the community that we're leaving. One of the things that I've heard from temple members, and the reason why they're afraid to work with people like me, is because they pour into us and then we leave. And I knew when I came to Jodo Shinshu that the people in our temple in Spokane, I am not who they thought about would accept and make Jodo Shinshu their life. Yet it was there for me. And I was accepted there when I came. And the teachings accept me as I am. And I think in this world that we're in, where it's so divisive, it's so other and, just cruel, we get to come into a space and hear the call of Amida Buddha. We get to hear Amida say, you are just as you are. It doesn't mean we're not going to change. It doesn't mean that we're things aren't going to get different. But we get to kind of change on our time. We don't have hoops to jump through to get anywhere special. Our birth is settled. So it's not like for me in Christianity where it felt really punitive. If you don't do this, you're going to hell. If you don't do that, you're going to hell. Oh, you'll be separated from your family for the rest of your eternity. All of these sort of guilt things that hang over and hurt. And that's not a loving doctrine, because then you can't be your authentic self. You don't have an opportunity to explore your bumps and bruises, your hard edges. I was so lucky to participate in the IBS symposium, and I talked about anger. And, some of the stuff from my childhood is where that comes from. And instead of this immense guilt for not being perfect, I get to hold up my anger against what the Buddha teaches and say, oh, I don't like it. I don't like that I am this way and I want to be this way. I feel out of accord. So I get to work on that. But I don't have anybody saying, if you don't fix that, no Pure Land for you. I'm accepted just as I am. And more importantly, I get to have an authentic, loving relationship with my wife, and I never have to apologize for who I am. I don't know a single LGBTQ plus person who wants to be other, who doesn't want to be accepted. I didn't choose to be gay. It's not like I woke up one day and said, ooh, let me go against the grain. This is going to be fun. It's not. It's hurtful. Every time we get a new president, I have to worry if Becca and I need to move to Canada. It's not a fun place to be. But I also, right before we left, it was our last day at the temple. They're not a kid anymore. They're in their 20s. They'd been visiting the temple for the first time in, probably 5 or 6 years. I knew them as a boy, and they were now transitioned to a girl. And they came up to me and said, Melissa, and at first they were very surprised I knew who they were. They said, oh, you're the first person that remembers who I am. They have this beautiful curly red hair. And they said, you made me feel like I could be myself. You made me feel like I was in a space where I could be myself. And I just wanted to say thank you. I'm that's what we get to do as Jodo Shinshu ministers. That's what we get to do as Jodo Shinshu practitioners. I can go to the bar and have a beer and someone asks me about Buddhism because there's a tattoo on my arm. and I love talking about it, and I'm not ashamed to talk about it. And I feel like I just get to tell you what I'm doing, and if that works for you, awesome. Come see me on a Sunday. Happy to spend time with you. Shoot me a text message. But I'm not selling anything. My salvation isn't dependent on it, nor is yours. So when the opportunity did Tokudo, and that felt like it really changed my life, going to Honganji, being part of that, being part of the ritual, getting to be there with Reverend David, Reverend Landon, it made me realize I couldn't keep splitting my life up so much. I couldn't keep working in finance for 40 hours and then trying to squeeze in the temple. It just wasn't enough. I wanted to do more. And then Bishop Peralta has been so kind to handhold me through this process because I do carry a lot of religious trauma. And so, moving into temple housing, all of the things that as ministers we're dependent on to be kind of taken care of has been a real stretch. But at the same time, I feel very safe. Because I'm safe in Namo Amida Butsu. And I'm safe in a healthy place. So I think what I would kind of end by saying, for anybody who is looking at Buddhism and Jodo Shinshu Buddhism specifically, you are welcome just as you are. And keep digging. Please join me in Gasho. When the ignorant and wise, even grave offenders and slanderers of the Dharma, all alike turn about and enter Shinjin, they are like waters that on entering the ocean become one in taste with it. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Thank you.